Alrighty, let's talk about contract to close.
Let's do.
What happens?
Everything.
Everything happens, honestly.
Right.
It's when it starts, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always this confusion that, oh, well, I've already got the buyer and I've already got, all you have to do is
qualified and I already found the house.
Or that, if it's the buyer, I already found the house. All you have to do is, put your name on the thing or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of thing. Or I'm going to sell it. All I need you to do, I've already got a buyer here. All I need you to do is, and of course, that's even worse. If the buyer doesn't have any representation, now I'm backtracking everything you did wrong and trying to help them at the same time or guide them because I can't help them legally. Certain advice, but not opinions, The contract to close period is, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, there's a lot that goes on while you're looking for your house, while you're trying to sell your house, while you're pitching people, you're negotiating, you're getting all this stuff done, and then you finally get an agreed terms. So that's the first part of it. So just for terminology, once the last party of a negotiation going back and forth signs an unchanged contract, you have an executed contract. So you and I, we're going back and forth. Nowadays, of course, a lot of that's verbal, but used to be we'd.
Don't date yourself.
Don't date myself too much, but faxes going back and forth, and by the time, when you fax something more than once, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and we would scratch out and send it back. It was ridiculous. Anyway, nowadays, much better, all digital, and a lot of it's verbal, but technically, so you and I, you might send me something, I change it, I send it back to you, you sign it without making changes. That's an executed contract. Okay? You've just agreed to my terms, you're agreeing to them, executed contract. We're going to take that and we're going to deliver it to title first and foremost. We're going to copy everybody in, including the lender, all parties involved. And at that point, once the lender gets it, they're going to request the option on the earnest check.
Earnest money and option.
Right.
So once it's executed and received by title, if you are the buyer, you need to deliver earnest money and option period money directly to title, name to title, transfer or check, and within 3 days.
Within 3 business days, yes.
We always recommend it to do it the first day just because you also need to schedule inspections and you're going to start getting calls. And so just go ahead and send it that first day that you execute it.
Yes, and don't think that you can go get your inspection and you don't like it and you're not going to end up paying the option. You're going to have to pay it. It's part of the contract you just signed. So it's best to go ahead and get that as quickly as possible.
And then, so there are a few things that are happening right away. But for you as a buyer, you have to schedule your inspections and...
Well, real quick, just so that we stick to that terminology. So you take that executed contract in. Once title gets those checks, and nowadays it's one check. We used to send one for option and one for earnest. Now it's one big check. And title will get that and they will receipt the contract. Now you have a receipted contract. That is really what goes to the lender. We usually give the lender the early one so they can get started anyway. But that's the receipted contract. That's the official one. Everything signed, sealed, delivered, checks and everything are paid.
Because lenders look at the numbers. So lenders wants to know that that money is going to be credited to you, the escrow money and the option money. If everything goes to accordingly, they both are credited to you. So the lender needs to know those numbers.
Right.
So inspection. So you move along and we really say, okay, as we are getting the contract executed, we start scheduling inspections. We have recorded a full video about inspections because it's so vast that we don't want to use a lot of this time for all the other things that are going on. So just go back and watch that if you have more questions about inspections. But at the same time the inspections are going on, both parties, third parties, the lender, the title, and us with the inspections are happening at the same time. So title is gonna do a few things in the beginning. It's gonna pull title, it's gonna open title to make sure the house is clear, that title is clear, and the actual seller is the owner of the title of the deed and is able to sell it to you legally.
Right.
There's no heirs out there or people that are going to claim that it's theirs.
Right, to the best of their knowledge, of course. And they go research that pretty well, and they're going to give the clear title on it. And it could be, there might be a builder lien on it. There's almost always, not always, if you own it free and clear, but it wouldn't be. But you're going to have a a loan. You're gonna have that loan lien on there. So they're gonna make sure that they know, is there 2 mortgages on this? Did you take out a second mortgage? All that data, all the amounts, all that stuff is in there so that everybody knows what's going on here. If there is some sort of a lien, maybe the seller has a judgment against them. They were in a lawsuit or something. Maybe there's an IRS tax lien against that person. We need to know about these things up front and make sure that those are going to be able to get paid off before, because it gets attached to the property. Even though it might have been the seller, it's going to get attached to the property.
And it has to be paid at closing. So if the seller are limited in funds and that it doesn't get paid, so that can really obstruct the completion of the sale.
Right. So yeah, we need to know all that up front. And real quick, also the importance of the difference in that execution and receipted. Receipted again is when all money has been brought in. The execution date, though, the reason that's important is because that's the date that starts the clock for all timelines in that contract. So when you have an option period, let's say your option period is 7 days. If I sign it today, we execute the contract today. Tomorrow is day one of the option period. Tomorrow is day one of when you have to get that check in. Tomorrow is day one of when your financing contingency goes, when your HOA contingency goes. All these things start based off of that execution.
And there are a lot of dates in that contract. It's a very, very long contract, and they keep adding and adding things. But there are a lot of dates and timelines that we give as a buyer. We give the seller, or the seller gives to the buyer. And like when you get the survey, if it's not a survey available, like how many days you have to get it, and how many days to object it or to order a new one, and who's paying for that, you know?
Right.
So title, very important to know, is that title doesn't represent either party. Title is the escrow officer is like a third party who's going to receive your money and just hold it for you until it gets to the closing table. But at the same time, when issues come or just things that need to be clear, it's not representing one party or the other. It doesn't represent the realtors either. So it's just facilitating the whole transaction.
Right. And much like everything else where we have our favorites and we usually try to get to, it's because we know them, we know their reputation, because it's important that they are diligent and that they understand everything and that they can communicate with all parties well. So we have our favorites that we like, and usually it's going to be the seller's choice on who that's going to be, because usually the seller's paying for it. And technically, whoever pays for it does have the right to choose who that may be. So,
And pay for it, what do you mean? Like pay for
the title policy. So that is a big term. It's a negotiable term here in the state of Texas for years and years and years and years. That has just leaned to that being a seller's expense. You're offering clear title here. But it doesn't have to be. It's one of the early negotiable terms on the contract. And so if that ends up getting pushed to the buyer for any reason, then now the buyer has the right to choose who it may be. They all charge, the title policy is the exact same. It's a state of Texas fee. It's calculated based off of the price of the home. And there's no, it's not like you're going to get a better deal here or over there. Now, the closing fee can vary, but that's fairly nominal. That's split between each party. The buyer pays, let's say it's $475. It's a closing fee. It's $475 to the buyer. It's $475 to the seller. If it's $500, it's $500 to the buyer. It's $500 to the seller. That is a little different from title to title, but it's not that dramatic.
Yeah, because they're very standard by law, by Texas law. They have to charge specific things, so it doesn't matter who you go to. They normally have to charge those recording fees and all that. But it is important to be an experienced title company, just because there are a lot of things that that are happening behind the scenes. When like you deal that you had this money that needed to be paid at the end of the deal. It was
judgment?
The judgment, against the seller.
Right.
That even the seller didn't know it was
right.
part of it. So, and they know better how to deal with those things and how to accommodate everybody to make sure nobody gets the first of all, to complete the sale, to get us to the closing table, but make sure all the parties get what they need, including that person who was owed whatever it was owed for the house. It gets solved at closing.
For sure. Any lien, any judgment, all of that gets, yes. And, in that case, it was good to have somebody. A lot of it's just about relationships, what the inspectors, the lenders, title company. Again, it's about a relationship when you know them and you've done lots of deals with them and you know their personalities, and you just get to, it just works better. Things just work better that way. And in that case, you know, it was nice to be able to kind of spitball, because they have a little bit more specific knowledge. I mean, we all have this general knowledge about all of this, but theirs is a little bit more specific in that. And we were able to come up with some creative ways, and we ended up actually taking that back and using some of it, because in his case, the judgment that was there, they don't know that he's selling the house. And so before that all came to, we used some of this to go back, and it was like, oh, I can't remember. I think it was like 12, 14 years ago.
Yes.
And so,
and you don't know until you actually sell it and they open title.
And there it is.
And sometimes you don't open title until you're under contract.
And so he was able to take some stuff. She helped with us to get some things, and he took that back to say, hey, you know, I just moved out here, and my CPA brought it to my attention. This is really old. It's not really affecting me much, but I'd like to clear it up. I see all these, you know, late fees and attorney's fees. If we can clear that out, I'd be willing to pay you the original amount right here and now. And I think I never heard the final conclusion on it. Actually, it's still a thing out, but they were working on that. So he was going to get a lot less than it would have been otherwise. And the title company, that title rep, was able to help us with that. It was very helpful.
At the same time, title is working on other things as well. Like if the property is with an HOA, they have to get all the documents from the HOA. Also, part of the contract says who pays for what. Sometimes you want to put a limit as a buyer, so you don't. If the certificate turned out to be $1,200, then you only as a buyer pay X amount and the seller pay X amount. That's something it gets put. It's actually it has its own amendment, the HOA amendment,
right?
Where you specific.
Unless it's a condo, then it's built into the contract.
Yes, yes. And condos can be very expensive, like the HOA documents, and it can take longer for title to get all those documents.
Get the resale
certificate, and sometimes I have extended closing contract just because of HOAs don't have all the documents, just because they're big companies and things like that.
And most of the times those go relatively smoothly. You know, those things have gotten to be a little crazy in price. There was a bill passed not too long ago where they had to limit how much those HOAs can charge, but they always find a loophole on how they can charge it.
Name is something else.
The HOA can't charge it, but the management company can.
Exactly.
So anyway, it can get expensive, so it is good to make sure that you understand that, and that the buyer has a cap on what they're going to be charged for, because you also might find that the seller is 12 months behind on payments, and there's late fees and accrued interest and all kinds of things that could be going on there. Let's make sure we protect that by putting a cap on what the buyer is going to be responsible for.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, the lender is doing its own homework. So one of the first things they want to do is order appraisal. We normally recommend to order appraisal after option period, just to make sure that it's
as soon as possible,
but right after option period, because sometimes they ask you to pay in advance, and if we don't pass option period, then it was just
right.
You pretty much just pay it.
Somebody's going to eat it. You know, it depends on how far along it is, of course, but some of those, in some cases, lenders, because often it was the lender that ended up eating that fee, and because of that, a lot of them have started charging up front. So they'll credit it back to you at closing, but you got to pay for it up front, and if that goes through and we don't get through option period, that's another expense that you've lost. So we'll typically wait until pretty darn close to where we feel like we're going to be good through option before we order that.
Along with that, they're gonna put you on the writing, so they are formally gonna put all the numbers specifically to this house, and check everything. Hopefully by then you already went to some type of underwriting where they are already verify all the information you gave them. But once they go to their underwriting, that's when they have to probably ask you for letters and more bank statements, the newest pay stub, like everything up to date. So it's going to be a lot of documentation that you are going to have to provide. And sometimes it feels that you redoing everything that you already did, but it's just because they cannot take what it was done 2 weeks ago to a deal that is about to close in a month. So they need to redo everything.
Yeah, and they will, to that quick point, they're going to repull credit right before closing.
Yes.
So we tell everybody, do not go out and buy a new car. Do not go buy a bunch of furniture, even if you put it on credit. Do not spend and do a lot of things that will impact your credit score, your debt to income, any of that stuff, because they'll go back, everything's perfectly fine, and right before closing, they're going to run back through and do a quick check on your credit, and that dings up, and oh, wait a minute, your ratios are off now. We're not going to be able to do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, we emphasize that and make sure that you don't. One thing on the title, another thing I want to clarify. So titles, not only is their responsibility to make sure that we have a clear title, to make sure all the liens and all that kind of stuff, but they're also then, title is actually an insurance policy. So they're giving that to the buyer to say, yes, we've cleared title, we've checked everything, we've made sure that this is clean, and that when it's going to you, you're protected. Should an issue arise, maybe, on the deal, most of the stuff that we're doing, it's not that old. There's newer subdivisions. There's not a lot of it's not like this rural land that was granted by the government or, that kind of stuff. But there can be a history where the spouse, the sibling of a dead parent or something was never notified, and they technically say, I have rights to that. And so that title policy is going to protect you. It's going to, at least they're going to represent you. So they're attorneys, and they're going to represent you in that to protect that certain situation. That's the actual thing that you're getting. In addition to making sure the title's clear up front, you're getting that protection. It's an insurance policy.
Yes, that's one of the names that are going to be thrown out there. And actually, one of the lines on the closing statement is title policy.
Right. But a lot of people confuse it as something to do with the title of the property.
Yes.
Right?
Or the insurance of the house, the property.
Or the insurance of the house. So you just get confusing with it. So
yes.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. One of the other things that we will always be doing is the survey. Now, I'd find probably 95% of the time, your seller is going to provide that to the buyer, really at contract, certainly within, as you said, on the contract, there's a number of days to provide that. We provide that to them, the existing one that we have, and it can be pretty old these days. It can accept a lot. But as a buyer now, I get this thing, whether I had to get a new one, or whether I'm getting this one from the seller, it's pretty important that we make sure to hang on to that, because these days, it depends on the property, of course, but for a standard resale home, that can be anywhere from $700 to $1,000 that somebody's going to have to pay for if we have to get a new one because you don't have one. And usually that's going to fall on the seller. It's your responsibility to provide one. Now, if I provide one, and for some reason, because it's too old, because I made a bunch of changes, maybe I added a pool, maybe I added an ADU in the back, maybe I changed the fence line, lots of things you could have done. That one's a little too old, it doesn't suffice, so we're going to have to order a new one anyway. So the main two people that can object to that is going to be the title company and the lender. So that's why we usually, as the seller side, as listing agents, we're going to take the existing survey and the T47, which is an addendum that goes with it, stating any changes that may have been made. We're going to give that to title up front. We're also going to ask them to open up title so that a lot of these things can get alleviated up front, because we're going to determine who's paying for it. And I don't know, I find out probably maybe, it depends on how eager the buyer is and what they're offering, but at 80% of the time, they're going to say, okay, you provide us yours within X amount of days. If for some reason it's not acceptable, is it going to be the buyer or the seller who pays for a new one? As a seller, we're going to say, hey, we've got ours. We paid for it, or we have ours. Here it is. If it's not acceptable by title, sometimes that's a little tough because you as the seller are sort of responsible for providing it. But if title has accepted it, now the only person that can decline it is the lender. And if your lender is not good with it, then you guys can go buy your own.
Yes. And talking about the lender, that's pretty much the one person you're going to be talking the most between the end of option period and close to closing, just making sure all the documents are turned into the underwriting, and then you can get you cleared to close. Once you get you cleared to close, you are gonna get a document that is the final package disclosure
Closing disclosures will go
from
out
the lender.
from the lender. 3 days. They have to go out 3 days at least 3 days in advance of closing.
And that's where all the lender is gonna run all numbers with you, how much is gonna be principal and interest, how much is gonna be your taxes based on the property specifically, and insurance that you will chop around with your insurance and then tell the lender and title who you wanna use, because that policy gets paid at closing. So all numbers, like final numbers, because once you agree on that and sign it, then send it to title. And then title start doing all the check and balances, and title adds its part, as well as, like their expenses, but also like taxes, property taxes, very important, who pays what according to the day that it closed, like prorated taxes from the seller. If you're the seller, you have to give it to the buyer. The buyer receives the credit. Let's say right now is May 22nd. Seller pays from January 1st to May 22nd, and then I'm responsible to pay from the end. So in the lender's number, they're normally gonna see that cushion. They like to see that you pay for like a month or two in advance to create that escrow cushion for your taxes.
So you got the credit balance between the buyer and the seller is for the tax, and that's going to be, as you say, from January to whatever the closing date is, because at the end of the year, the new buyer is going to pay it. Now, if it's from somewhere around October, depends on when everything comes out, but from October on, when we've received not only the valuation, this year's valuation, but this year's tax rate, and that's the one that usually is October sometimes. So if they have all that, title's going to pay it at closing. So that switches. So now there's actually the buyer is crediting back the seller because it's getting paid for at closing.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what month.
Exactly.
Yeah, and how big that number can be. But then there's also the the prepaids. So as a buyer, you're going to have your 1 year of insurance is going to get paid. So it starts effective that day and goes for 1 year. But they're going to put into your escrow account, usually, as you said, 3 months of insurance and 3 months of taxes for that buffer in there. And then with each payment that you make, it fills and adds to that and adds to that and adds to that, so that at the end of the year or whenever the next insurance period comes up, they have the money, they'll make that payment for you. And then all of that balances out, which can adjust your payment a little bit at the end of each year.
And that final statement gets sent to you. We get a copy too. We go over it as well, the closing statement. Standard normally is a day before, no more, just because they need to calculate until the last minute before closing. And that's when you decide, okay, I'm going to do a wire transfer for the money and I have to bring to the table as a buyer, or I have to, or I'll bring a cashier's check. The seller gives the information to the title company on where they need money to get received. The seller also coordinates both parties coordinate when they want to sign. If it's anybody out of town or out of country, it's very important. Closing, you have to count that you need to be in person for closing. Just count on it. For some reason, you're going to be out of the city, out of the country, more importantly, you need to relay that information, because it depends. It's not a rule. Way in advance. Yeah. Way in advance. It's like the minute you have closing date or
as soon as we get under contract, you know.
Yes, because we have a closing date in the contract. Right. And then you can move it during the negotiation period. If you know you're going to be traveling, it's one of the things we can move easily. The closing date versus getting so close. Because
I'm out of the country.
Exactly.
Like,
no. Yeah. You need to sign. Well, send it to me by email. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So it depends which party are you, seller or buyer.
If it's cash or not.
Exactly.
There's
what
a loan
type
involved.
Of loan?
Yeah.
So
some of those can be done digitally, actually, which is fantastic. But yeah, we need to know, because probably what you're getting to is the international ones, particularly. If you're not going to be in the country, you are likely going to end up needing to go to your consulate to sign those documents. And depending on where you are and all that, some of those are way booked out, or they're way far away from you. So those need to be arranged. It's not as simple. Now, if you're out of state, those are pretty easy. Or out of the city, those aren't that bad. We
schedule
can
a
send a
mobile
mobile notary.
notary.
Or now we're doing online notaries. That came really popular. That's one of the big benefits that came out of COVID. We mastered that technique.
But sometimes those have extra fees, so you just have to account for those.
Yeah, but worth it to not have to travel back in.
Yes, yes. One thing I want to mention is like once you sign the documents, keys don't get to you in that specific moment when you sign it.
Right. Especially if you're first to sign.
Exactly. Yeah. So the keys are handed off once it's funded.
Right. So once the either party can sign first, but both parties have to sign. Unlike the old days, we don't sit around all together. So people might not be in the same state or country. You're signing in different times. Even if you're both here in Austin, the seller might come in at 10 and the buyer comes in at 2 to sign. But once the second party has signed, all of those documents get sent to the lender. The lender reviews, makes sure everything has been signed, that all the documents that they need are correct, and they'll initial the wire. So the buyer's wire has been sent in previously. The lender's wire then, once approved, it comes in, and once title has all funds from everybody, that's what we call funding. And now all checks can be cut if the seller is going to get theirs. All agent cuts get made out if there's such as the judgment or the loans on the properties. All of that at that point gets paid out from title.
And as a seller, you get your money.
And then and then the buyer gets their keys. Right.
Yes. So one thing that I think was kept that it's important to mention is the final walkthrough that we want to do right before we go to closing. I mean, it doesn't have to be the same day, but normally a day or two before. You go as a buyer and walk the property, and just to make sure it's in the same condition that when you first walk it the first time, and also like if it was anything negotiated during the option period, like you can with the contract, like appliances, like leave the fridge or shelves in the garage or things like that. We just want to make sure everything is theirs, but that always happens before you close, no after the closing table.
Right, and that one can be different depending on whether or not when you went to look at the house and when you contracted on the house, was it vacant? Because probably not much has changed. So we usually requested, of course, it be cleaned. It depends on the situation, professionally cleaned. So we're going to go in and make sure that that's been done. But if it had been lived in, if the owners were there and they're just moving out a couple of days before closing, we want to make sure everything that should be out is out. As you said, everything that should be there is there, and that they didn't ding the wall when they were moving the furniture out or something like that. And if it is vacant, as odd as it sounds, we want to make sure that there's not somebody there living in the house, and those kinds of things. Because you actually sign a document, a title that says, as title, they're going to say, we have not gone to inspect the property. We assume that you have, so that if somebody's living, you might have squatters in there, and you just close on that.
Yes. Now it's your problem.
Some dude's in there, and he's got squatters' rights.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is it's a pretty simple, depending on the situation, but a pretty simple process, but important to just go put some eyes on it. Because you also never know, like we had closings during the winter storms and such. There were a lot of people that went in to their final walk and a pipe had frozen and burst and the whole thing was flooded. Or, I've heard of situations, and not from anybody I know, but, something caught on fire or something like that. So you're just making sure that nothing's out of the ordinary.
Yes. But yeah, that's pretty much. I know it's a lot of information, but I think it's important to set expectations throughout the process. And sometimes we don't relay all this information to our clients at once, just because it can be overwhelming.
Right.
We do it as it goes, but we wanted to put everything in once, so you know exactly how the process is.
Yes, as fluid as we could.
Yes. All right, we're done with this one.
All right. Check.
Check.